Uh, Namaskar and good afternoon. I think let's start this session 2 hours. Normally, in our seminar world, these used to be called post-lunch sessions, and these used to be tough. I think the good part with the webinar format is that these can be called with lunch sessions also. And imagine the with lunch session is disrupt philanthropy, next philanthropy, and 2 hours of lot of discussion and knowing a lot of work of many institutions on some of the toughest subjects, some of the toughest challenges we all are going through. Because I think it's easy to say post COVID, fine, but as I've been saying again and again that there's nothing called post COVID now. It's all with COVID, and it'll take its own time, because even once we are out of the health crisis, the whole lot of other crises which are created because of this pandemic will remain there, and will take years and decades to really come back to the normal and maybe to the new normal. Today, we also have four very, distinguished speakers, but more than that, the doers in the field who will share their own experiences, and I will keep introducing them. But before that, the subject, which is more important, and just 2 hours to cover four major themes, is not a small task. But I think we'll be able to give some glimpses of all these four issues. One for sure is the marginalized communities, and the definition of marginalized communities also is changing. I mean, I remember at Goonj last year we started something called missed out communities, because very soon we realized that marginalized communities, I mean, right from people with leprosy to people with disability to sex workers to a whole lot of other communities who in any case need special attention, even in the normal time. But the time has come when the so-called normal, and when I am saying normal, I'm just talking about the financially normal people who can at least afford 2 meals a day. They are pushed back, and they have taken that space of the marginalized communities. We can understand that the originally marginalized communities are pushed back further. I mean, I remember we work very extensively with the people with leprosy, and it is an absolutely subject. And in India, we still have almost about 800 colonies of people with leprosy, and this is also even today one of the biggest cause, for the permanent disability. And I remember in one of the conversation how the very simple fact came up, which was very disturbing, that large number of people suffered in these many months. People affected with leprosy and their families, not only because of food shortage, but because people didn't have access to simple bandage or a betadine ointment, because that was not in the list of need. Asha worker who was providing support to the people, she is now busy in COVID care that way. And I remember in another conversation we found that how the patients are literally forced to put phenyl and kerosene on their wounds just because the medicine is not there. So this is what I'm saying, that there is a huge amount of these marginalized communities which we will be covering today. The second, gender issue, which is again become much more important. It has been important, but then there are a lot of issues, because ultimately, and the third issue, which is mental health, and I see a lot of mix in these two issues, because we know that a large part of our country ultimately survives in a single room. They live happily because they have a lot of open space. They can go out, they can sit out and all that. And we suddenly found in these last 15, 16 months, so many times they got together. They were forced to remain in a small room. There were no open spaces available, which certainly had a huge impact, on the gender issues, for sure, the domestic violence and so many other things. And also on the mental health, and mental health we'll discuss further, because there are so many other components of that. And the last point which we will discuss today is again the most important point, which is our Northeast states. I mean, and I'll repeat it today in the session also. I remember when I was a kid and I was growing, and we used to read newspapers in Hindi and English. In Hindi, the only news about the northeastern floods in those days. On the page 3 of those days, now the page 3 has a different meaning. It used to say Northeast, Purvottar Bharat, pure desh se kata. Northeast is cut off from the country. That was all about the floods in Northeast. Fine. So this time also Northeastern states have gone through a very tough phase in terms of COVID and the after impact of COVID. And also these many months are also full of disasters. I mean, the number of cyclones which we have seen in these last many months, we have not seen in the last few years in the period of 1 year. So these are 4 topics which we will take up. Very interesting format. The format is that one video about one beautiful doer organization on one subject, and then one expert who has spent his or her life in dealing with such subjects to give the perspectives. So we'll spend about an hour like this with 4 small 3-4 2 minutes videos and 4 experts' comments of 10 minutes each. And then we all will come back to the discussion and the Charcha, where we will also invite comments and questions from the audience. And of course, there is a lot to discuss and there is much lesser time with us right now. So we will start with a video from a very beautiful institution called Jan Sahas, which has done absolutely amazing work in this particular phase, especially when they saw millions of people walking and that entire community which were walking on the road. And this year also, large number of people were not walking but went back to their natives, to their areas from where they had come through in buses and trucks and whatever. So work with the marginalized communities. So the first topic for today is marginalized community. I will ask Gautam to play the video of Jan Sahas, and then I'll invite Mr. Paul Divakar. I'll introduce him briefly, and then he will basically comment on that and will come up with his issues, his learnings, and his work on this particular issue. Over to you, Gautam.
In India, during the pandemic, some of the social groups faced multiple challenges and vulnerability in their day-to-day life, such as migrant worker. According to the government data, in India, we have about 140 million migrant workers. But as per estimate of some non-government organization and academicians, in India, we have between 200 million to 240 million migrant workers. So about 50% of India's unorganized sector workforce come from the migrant community. But we haven't any real-time data or tracking system for the migrants. As per our LMT, Longitude Migration Tracking Survey, 93% migrant workers come from the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and other social excluded communities. Their social status also contribute for their vulnerability. Women migrant workers are more vulnerable and invisible. In India, we have multiple social security programs for migrant workers and other excluded communities. But the challenge is no any solid delivery mechanism exists at a ground level. And as far as the migrant workers are concerned, the portability is playing a very, very important and crucial role. And because of non-availability of portability in the social security schemes, migrant workers are not able to access the benefit of these social security schemes. During the pandemic, my organization reached out to about 2 million migrant worker households with the food, ration, transportation support, mental health counseling, and helping them for access to entitlement. And that's the immediate response to the pandemic or COVID-19. And now for the medium term and the long term response to ensure community resilience and recovery, we started Migrant Resilience Collaborative. Migrant Resilience Collaborative is a multi-stakeholder collaborative where we are working with the community, philanthropy, industry, civil society organization, and the government department. And all the stakeholders come together and work together to impact the life of the migrant workers. Currently, we are working in 100 districts of India, 80 source districts and 20 destination districts. In this initiative, basically we try to work at all levels, source, transit point and the destination. As of now, we reach out to about 1.2 million migrant workers, and our goal to help about 10 million migrant workers in next 3 to 5 year period of time. We are using technology a lot for like creating an impact on the lives. We are using technology for access the entitlement for the migrant communities, and we also started a national toll-free helpline for the migrant workers to ensure worker protection, because sometimes worker facing various kind of challenges related to the wage recovery, violence at the workplace, and many other related issues. So through this whole program, we are trying to ensure dignity and respect for the community, and also long-term resilience and recovery from the pandemic.
Thank you. This was Asif Bhai. What a beautiful work this institution has been doing. We all are watching that. And before I call, Mr. Paul and introduce him, we were just talking about that how this the definition of marginalized community is also ultimately changing in the COVID phase. I remember we were working with the Kavals in Delhi, and with which we can't even imagine that they will also one day come in the marginalized community, maybe even for some time only, and hopefully they will come back. So these are like third, fourth generation of the Sufi Kavals. Okay, and the only thing they've done so beautifully with their art and tradition is that Sufi Kavali. Now imagine for the last 17-18 months there is no Kavali, so there's no source of earning. And the irony is that these people can't even go on the road to get the relief material, even at the state of hunger. Because whenever they moved out, they were wearing some sherwanis in their earlier avatar, right? And they were very well respected people there. So I remember that one Kawal, when we were talking and working with them, is like even if we go out and someone see us in the link, in the queue, people often comment ki yaar aap hamara hak marne aa gaye, that you have also come to take our right. Although the fact remains that they are also going through the same hunger and same issues, and also huge amount of dignity issues right now which are challenged. So I'm calling Mr. Paul Divakar, and I was just telling the team also that I am so blessed today that these 2 hours will give me a lot of chance to learn a lot from the seniors of this sector. We're too new that way out here. So Paulji, we will see, and we also want you to cover the need for philanthropy, okay, to understand the dynamics which are there whenever we talk about working with the marginalized communities. And I know that large number of people in the audience know you well, but I'll not go through your entire CV, which is really, really huge. Only a few lines about Mr. Paul Divakar. He's an advocate for Dalit rights, an expert on economic rights and human rights defender on inclusion and issues around untouchability and atrocities. He's one of the founding members of National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights, and currently the General Secretary NCDHR for Global Network and Advocacy. He has been active in popularizing the Sustainable Development Goals and bringing in the aspect of inclusion in the discourses on the emerging development paradigm. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Anshu, and really congratulate Charcha 2021 and also the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy for inviting this and then taking this very, very important aspect. And Anshu, I really, the insight that you have given, the shades of marginalized are really shifting. And unless and until we uncover these layers, then the communities which really need our solidarity and support may be so much hidden that's extremely difficult for us, and therefore the inequality and the level playing field will continue to be the same and will pose a challenge. So today I'm extremely happy to be part of this panel, and also excited to see this fantastic video by Asif, a good friend of mine, and Jansahas, the organization that he has tremendously initiated in the last over a decade, but in the last 5 years, he has really reached out. And I think just his experience of how come that the issue of marginalization, and then when we have seen that even among this issue of migrant labor, he says 93% of them come from the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities, and the OBCs. So the broad structure which has created this kind of immense social barriers, which is somehow sitting on our caste system, which has, for no fault of anybody, excludes and throws out millions of people and privileges and shows give some extreme amount of so-called talent to some, and I think those are the sometimes are the ones who will be continuously be recognized. So today, I think we have come a far, that we are beginning to recognize who these marginalized are and how are we going to look at this. I think it is very clear if we say that several decades have passed before development has touched these marginalized communities. And I think even in philanthropy, several years have passed. I think only in the last few years that we are able to begin to touch the real core, not only the core. I think only the begin to scratch the surface of the dynamics of working with the marginalized. I think one example we should take, and not often would I advocate for taking union government as an example, but I think over the years in this particular area, I must say, even though I have had so many challenges, I must say, I would like to point out a special policy called Special Component Plan for Scheduled Castes and Tribal Subplan for the Scheduled Tribes that the union government has started. You know our 5 year plans, which have started in 1950s, and only after 5 year plans, that is after 25 years of implementing these plans, did the government realize that the general development is really not reaching the communities who are supposed to be reaching. The development indicators, especially of the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, whether it's education, health, or access to amenities, have not improved at all. And this was in 1974 and later in 1979. Um, then the then government has introduced this special component plan for scheduled castes, and then just previously the tribal subplan. What it does is, in the total, earlier we used to have plan, non-plan. I think now we have the development budget and the other budget. So I think in the development budget or the plan budget, a portion of the amount which is equal to the proportion of the population of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes is set aside, and more than the funds, the perspective of looking at innovative development programs where they are participating in designing and in executing these programs has been thought of. And that is the core of the special component plan and tribal subplan. And I think that has really changed the whole canvas of the development of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Why do I say that? Now we recognize we have a lot of, even prior to our current new education policy, we have other education policies, and they felt that the primary education is something that has to be focused on for the most marginalized communities. They started building infrastructure, but still the learnings and the out of school children among the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes have remained very high. And then they realized, they got in the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and they realized that it's not enough you have infrastructure. There are barriers which are very particular to scheduled caste children. Even though they are talented, the teacher would not allow them to sit in the first row. Their books, their work is not being evaluated. They are forced to be cleaning the classrooms and several such things. And this is the routine. Nobody thinks that this is a violation or an atrocity or a great wrong that is being committed. This is what the normal. If any work has to be done, If any, you heard of even recently, when a dead carcass is to be removed, they'll call the person from that Chamar community or the other Dalit communities, and then they call their parents to say, "You get your parents to clean this carcass from the campus." So when you have such kind of a complete indignity and an exclusion of Dalit children in schools, what is the amount of a program which is spending millions and crores, but is not able to reach the communities which is supposed to reach? So this program, Special Component Plan for Scheduled Castes and Tribal Subplan for Scheduled Tribes, has started planning for the development of the scheduled castes. And then they had education, they had employment, agriculture, and several so on and so forth. I'm not saying there is still a lot of challenges that still needs to go. But the learning that we have done from this is two things. One, definitely there needs to be a proportion of funds for the development, total development, that is set, we need to set apart for the marginalized communities. And as Anshu was saying, these marginalized communities, we need to continuously revise our system as who are these marginalized communities. How do we have indicators which say that these are marginalized communities? And of course, it's not just access to development. It is also basic human rights, atrocities, violence, exclusion, indignity, and several others which are seen. So from there, we see it's not just allotment of funds, but we also need to see that the participation of the community in designing and in execution is very, very critical. And from there, we look at seeing it's not sufficient that it is enough that we look at the designing, but also ensure that the agency of these communities need to be strengthened if you're talking of philanthropy. And so I think closing, the lessons that we are learning for the domestic philanthropy is, I'm just looking at this KPMG survey that was brought in, 8,649 crores have been set aside for the development. And I was looking at the report, 269 pages, not a single mention of work towards the marginalized communities is mentioned. Now, how can we have, I think this disrupt philanthropy is very, very important, that we cannot have women's development without ensuring that there is a sufficient amount of focus and perspectives in the participation. We cannot have disability addressing the issues of communities' disability without their participation. And we cannot have marginalized communities like scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and the several occupational things. And I think even health-wise, Anshu was saying leprosy. And now in COVID also, we have been completely excluded. And in all major disasters, they have been excluded. So how do we look at the participation of these communities in the designing, not just as recipients, in the designing and in implementation, and therefore strengthening the agency of these? And I think this, I would leave it saying that when we're looking at philanthropy, I think we need to look at all the 4 principles which UNICEF talks about the child development. That we have to look at, of course, the survival. And a lot of the programs of the philanthropy that we're talking about is mostly survival. Roti, kapda, makan. But what about the development of higher education, of entrepreneurship, of land, and access to capital? But then it's not that enough. We need protection. You see the kind of violation of their human rights that is happening. And then finally, we need participation. I think without these, the philanthropy that we are really pushing will not level the playing field, and will not address the inequalities, but continue to heap inequalities on in the society, and therefore will not really address the major focus of access to justice and peaceful societies that we're talking about. Thank you very much. Sorry if I have
No, please. Thank you so much, Paul. And I think I'm asking all the listeners to come up with the questions and all. We have enough time after all these 4 sessions. So we have enough time to really discuss a lot of things. And Paul, to go on your point, I think until unless we make people a part of the planning part, I think I always say that till the time we will have the demeaning words like donor and beneficiary, and we will not convert all of us in a stakeholder, things actually will not change, because often people like us find the problem and we only find the solution. And that's one of the biggest problem. That's why maybe we are not able to see the issue. The next issue is another very important issue of gender. Of course, we cannot cover it in such a short time, but one thing which we saw in the philanthropy, or also on the money giving and the resource giving part in the last 18 months. First time it was completely focused on the hunger. The next time it was largely focused on the health. So obviously, whether you are talking about marginalized community, or you are talking about mental health, or you are talking about gender issues, a lot of institutions who have been working in these areas are going through a tough phase. Although these issues also need much more attention, even the kind of attention we were giving it earlier. Now the COVID has made it certainly more complicated. But before I invite Srilata ji, we all know about a beautiful institution called Breakthrough, and many of us have been a complete fan of their earlier campaign called Bell Bajao, gender, domestic issues, and all that. So I think let's see a small video from Sohini Bhattacharya, a dear friend and CEO of Breakthrough, and then I'll introduce and Srilata ji, and then take it forward. Over to you, Gautam.
My name is Shohini, and I work with an organization called Breakthrough. Breakthrough has been working to transform gender norms to make violence against women and girls unacceptable for the last 21 years. We work with adolescents and young adults, the breakthrough generation, who will actually make this possible in the long run. We use multimedia campaigns, community mobilization, and leadership development as our main tools. At the heart of this is a gender equity curriculum called Taro Ki Toli, or Gang of Stars, that we use in government schools as well as in communities to build gender equitable viewpoints, encourage adolescents to have difficult conversations on taboo subjects with their parents as well as with their peers, and teach life skills. In partnership with the Education Department of the Punjab government, we have now scaled this up across 4,500 government schools, where a gender lens has been applied to the curriculum, and 20,000 teachers will be trained to deliver the curriculum as well as examining their own gender biases in the long run. This is what we want to now scale up across India. We currently work with 530,000 adolescents and 3,000 young adults across 14 districts in 5 states of northern India. During COVID-19, it's this young adults, our team change leaders in the age group of 15 to 25, who actually became our mainstay. They reached out to the communities that we work in, ensuring that they have dry rations and masks and sanitizers in place. They took up a campaign on domestic violence to create awareness around it, to share information on helplines and legal services. And now that the second phase is over, these team change leaders are actually training people in the villages on COVID protocol and the vaccination processes. We're really proud of them. In addition, we have also created a whole communication package with IEC materials, radio jingles, as well as public service ads around myths around vaccination and vaccine hesitancy in rural India. We are encouraging all organizations to use this with their networks as well as with their communities. We look forward to a gender equitable India, where adolescents are at the center and gender equality is at the heart of everything. Where adolescents' voices and opinions matter, not just about their own lives and choices, but about important things like climate change and inclusivity and diversity. That's the world that we dream of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shohini and the Breakthrough, and for the amazing work you guys have been doing. And also, I think all of us must look through the new videos of Breakthrough, which are some very small videos on these vaccination issues. Very powerful videos which we all need to really scale up. So, Srilata ji, you are known as feminist activist, research scholar, and trainer. Srilata Batliwala is the next speaker, And she's currently Senior Advisor, Knowledge Building Kriya, an international organization that works as the intersection of gender, sexuality, and human rights. And it's a very complicated subject right now, and it's a very very widespread subject, because if I remember the images of last year, when these millions of people were walking, and a large number of them were women and little girls, and you go back to the roots, and you don't know what safe place is there for you, and then you're also walking for so many kilometers. Then I remember, as an institution, our 70-80% workforce of Gunj is actually women. Okay? And so we decided, as an institution, like all other institutions, that we will not, in the initial months, will not cut the salary, and because we are not able to call them, so the salaries will go. And I remember a large number of calls from many of them, where they just said that money is fine, thank you very much, but you just call us for work. We want to be
Out of the house.
out of that room, out of that house. So on this note, I am leaving it on you with a very critical question: that how can the money giver community or the resource community understand the gender issues better and fund these issues much better? I think the understanding is grown, but in the COVID phase now, that it is the problem is really grown. I'm sure that we also need much bigger resources to tackle it. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anshubai. So I'm going to approach, first of all, namaskar, assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon to everyone in the audience. And many thanks to the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy and to the organizers of Charcha 2021 for organizing this very important panel. I'm going to use a few slides to make my point. So let's hope this works. And I think that will explain better some core points that I think we need to address in order to understand what really has to happen for philanthropy to play its role in supporting and advancing gender equality and equity. Equity and equality are not synonymous, so we have to be careful about what we mean by each of them. So I call this How to Build a Rocket Ship, or the lessons that philanthropy can learn on how to advance gender equality. So I'm being very consciously provocative here because I want to take us into a slightly different world and say, okay, what happened when they wanted to build the first rocket, or the first spaceship? What did they do? First of all, the people who were investing in that process, of course, at that time it was mainly governments, but now it's, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and God knows who else. But you don't know how to build a rocket ship. You want a rocket ship, but you don't know how to build one. So what you do is you bring in the people who have the expertise, and a diverse range of people were needed with understanding of different aspects of the challenge in order to create a successful rocket ship. So they were brought in. Then they were trusted because the investors believed that they knew what they were doing and would get them there. Then they assumed that it'll take some time. They knew they were not going to have a rocket ship by day after tomorrow, and that there are no quick fixes or silver bullets. And they knew that there were going to be a lot of risks. They knew that the first prototype may explode or fail to take off. I just want to check if I'm audible and if the slides are visible.
Yes.
I'm audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. So, what was the result of that process of bringing in the people with the expertise, the understanding, the experience, trusting them to get you there, knowing it'll take time, and being prepared for some risks and failures? The result was a rocket ship. And now, all over the world, people can build them and send them into space. But when it comes to gender equality, and indeed, I'm thankful to my colleague, Mr. Paul Divakar, for bringing this out beautifully within the example of, and to Anshubai for bringing this issue out so clearly. When it comes to social problems, when it comes to social injustices, everybody thinks they're experts. So when it comes to gender equality, funders tend to begin, and I know what I'm talking about because I also sat inside the funding community for some years of my life when I worked at the Ford Foundation. They think they know how. They think they have the answer to how gender equality has to be advanced. Okay? Having never actually done it, gone into a community and tackled issues of gender injustice or gender inequality, but they think they have the answer. And they have this silver bullet that's going to change everything. Here are some classic examples. Microcredit. Give the women a loan and they will transform their lives. Send a girl to school, it'll transform her life. Put women in political office, it'll transform. So everybody thinks they have this one silver bullet that will change everything and fast. Worst of all, they are quite skeptical, if not suspicious, about the expertise of those who've been doing this work for decades. They worry that their money will be wasted, or that if they consult us, we have a vested interest in getting their money and we won't be straightforward. And they think that all the tested strategies that we advocate, they're too slow, you see, because they are not silver bullets. And so they want visible, measurable results by tomorrow. It's all about, the social impact investing, where you have to see the impact in 12 months and 18 months. Patriarchy is at least 10,000 years old, but we are supposed to dismantle it in 18 months through this little project by giving loans and sending girls to school and putting women in the panchayat. And they don't want any failures. They don't want backlash or setbacks. But the fact is, when you begin to challenge any power structure, the caste power structure, the gender power structure, there is going to be backlash. There is going to be pushback. There's going to be violence. There's going to be failures. There are certain things that are not going to work. And so the result of this kind of investing with these silver bullets and wanting to be able to count the impact by day after tomorrow is you get a patchwork quilt. Bits of this and bits of that here and there. But the fact is that changing a very deeply embedded power structure like patriarchy, and especially a power structure that works very closely intersecting with structures like caste and like class, like economic power and caste power and so on, it requires intervention in 4 domains. And you get these 4 domains when you use the gender at work framework and see how you have to create change from the individual to the systemic level. And you have to create change not just in the formal domain of laws and policies and resources, but also in the informal domain. So let's see what is where. So in the individual informal domain is what we call consciousness. That is how people look at themselves and look at others. It's about self-worth, confidence, attitudes, like casteism, deeply internalized. It's deep in the consciousness, as are gender attitudes. On the individual formal side is our access to our rights, resources, services, entitlements. On the informal systemic side are these very, very deeply entrenched social norms, cultural beliefs, practices, stigmas, barriers, and in the formal systemic side are our laws and policies and budgets and so on. Now, the fact is that silver bullets might be able to fix the two domains on the formal side. They may be able to increase access to rights, to resources, to services, to entitlements like healthcare, like getting a loan, etc. They may also be able to improve our faulty laws, improve our policies, increase budgets, and so on. But they are notoriously hopeless in addressing the two left domains, that is, shifting people's consciousness and shifting the kind of belief systems and the social norms, caste attitudes, gender attitudes, practices, rituals that actually is where people experience stigma, injustice, and exclusion equally strongly, not just in the form of lack of resources and poverty and lack of services, etc. And it's these two domains where without tackling these two domains, we cannot achieve lasting change. So the problem is they think these approaches that tackle these domains are too slow, but in fact, they are faster in the long run because they begin to dismantle the deep roots of injustice. Here's another way to look at it. I'm going to run through this quickly. Look at the barriers, for instance, that a poor woman, a Dalit woman, a woman from an indigenous community, a woman who is a sex worker or who is disabled or otherwise stigmatized or excluded. Look at the barriers she has to cross if her rights are violated or if she wants to access some resource or service. First of all, she has to be aware that she has this right. And vast majority of women in our country still simply don't have that awareness, which is why the work of groups like Breakthrough is so important, because they're creating this awareness of their rights at a very early stage in young women. Once they have the awareness and they say, okay, I want to access this right or I want to access this resource, sorry, you have to get permission. As a woman, you have to negotiate. As a girl, you have to negotiate the family, men in the family, elders of the family, your mother-in-law, whoever, in order to access the right. If you manage to cross that barrier, then there's the barrier of the resources that you need. Maybe you need bus fare to go to the nearest police station and file a complaint of domestic violence or caste-based violence or sexual harassment in the workplace, but it involves costs. Maybe the service itself is going to be expensive for you as a person who lives in a low-income group community. Then the services, the laws, the justice system has to be available. There has to be mechanisms in place. This is where the infrastructure for enforcement and enabling of rights comes into the picture. These have to be in place in order to access your rights. And then finally, the worst barrier of all is you manage to cross all these four and you reach the so-called service provider, the so-called duty bearer, the person who is supposed to protect your rights and prosecute perhaps the violators of those rights. And then you come up against this wall of these deeply entrenched negative attitudes or the political power. So if a Dalit girl is raped and she cannot get, and we know many cases that have happened in this country in the last few years, she can't even get her complaint registered at the police station because the rapists are upper caste men with huge political influence. Or you go to court seeking maintenance, and the judge shouts at the woman saying, "You're a shameless woman to even be bringing these issues to the court," because the judge's attitude hasn't changed. We've changed the law, but his attitude hasn't changed. We've changed the law, but the police attitudes haven't changed. So, to put it very simply, I think the lessons for philanthropy are very clear and very simple. Social change is rocket science. Gender equality is rocket science. It is complex, and in fact, you need to learn and understand how social power is constructed before you can go about trying to understand how to shift it. There is no historical evidence that any silver bullet has ever created lasting change in society. In fact, on the contrary, giving women loans, sending girls to school, all these magic mantras, because as we know, these are addressing only one dimension of the social power structure and they leave out others. So just like rocket science, there's a science to creating social change, and you have to have the humility to understand who do you learn that science from. And this is the crux. There are a host of organizations and individuals around the world across the length and breadth of this country. We have a rich history of activism, particularly in the areas of, anti-caste work and work on gender equality. And they have been engaged in empowering women, advancing gender equality for decades. Now, these are not necessarily the people with the impressive degrees, but they are people who've actually built complex change processes on the ground, as well as in laws and policies. Respect their experience, respect their expertise, talk to them, as my colleagues have said, listen, learn from them. They're not the gender experts brought in by KPMG. You know, what is the gender expertise of KPMG? It's them talking to the Shohini Bhattacharyas, the Srilata Batliwalas, the Madhumeras, the Kalpana. This is how they get their expertise, believe me. So respect and learn from those who have actually created change, and don't push your own agenda. And advancing gender equality is like rocket science. So the only way to get there, in my view, is to learn from those who have experience in building this particular rocket ship. Let me stop there. We can go into detail.
Absolutely.
In the
Absolutely clear, bang on. In any case, Lataji, the patchwork and the band-aid is not a solution for anything. And one of the things which I've been saying in a different context a little bit, I always say that if you see the farming community in India, farmers have been able to come out with a few thousand variety of rice. Okay, and they can add 2 arm ka kalam and create a third arm, but they are still called unskilled. And people like us who write to pager on them, we are called skilled, and we will be consulted for farming.
That's right. That's exactly.
I think that lens has
That's why I was so happy when you brought out this point, Anshuji, right at the beginning. It's a critical thing. It's a critical thing. It's very unfortunate.
We all need to change lenses, and I think one lesson which COVID has taught us, whether we want to learn or not, is that something failed miserably.
Absolutely.
And what is that something? And if we are rebuilding certain things, can we rebuild with the different lenses, different thoughts, different stakeholders? And for sure, in this particular cause, a huge amount of philanthropy or the resources are needed, because in this entire disease phase, a huge amount of resources gone to the health or hunger. But this is also an important aspect which is note, and it needs a lot of attention. Great, thank you so much. There are a lot of questions which are coming up, and we'll take it up in the last 45 minutes. Third chapter for today is another important part, and that is the mental health. Many of us talk about it. Many of us who work in this space see the impact all across. with my COVID journey, I think which has not been very simple. Many times I went to the doctors after this 1 year's personal COVID journey. And I remember last time visiting a doctor friend, and he said that, Anshu, I had a choice. I started getting very depressed. It became very tough for me. And then one fine day, I realized that the cause is that I'm really, really listening to a large number of patients every day, and that is causing a lot of anxiety, because every single patient who is coming to me is coming with a lot of new aspects, lot of new things which are happening in this life. And he said that a time came when I also started consulting, and started taking extra medicines or consultations for that. So it is a subject which is a very important subject, which even within the family, within the community, we do not want to accept. And then maybe that is how it becomes more problematic. Now, with the country going through this tough, financial phase, family phase, economic phase, all kind of phases, this needs urgent attention for sure. And I think Raj Mariwala is here, and Raj will speak about it. Before that, let me just again, as a tradition of this program, bring a small video from Center for Mental Health Law and Policy in Pune. Just a few insight on Atmiyata. Dr. Soumitra Pathare is there from there. Gautam, over to you, and then we bring Raj to speak, and I'll introduce her.
Atmiyata is not just a community mental health program. Atmiyata is a public health movement for mental health. I like to describe Atmiyata as for the people, of the people, and by the people. Our Atmiyata champions are community volunteers who are chosen from the same villages that they live in. And we only work in villages where the village community, the panchayat, the sarpanch, and the leaders in the village agree that they do need a mental health service, and that they would like to have a local person who is mentored, supervised, and is then able to provide them with mental health services locally. Atmiyata champions not only provide counseling to people with common mental disorders, but they also do a few other things. So, if somebody has a severe mental health problem, they will refer them and link them up with the public mental health service and ensure that they go and get that help that they need. They also provide help in terms of social care, which is to help people obtain their social benefits of which they are entitled to, which might be things like a Manrega job card, disability benefits, and widow's pension, and such things. And the fourth thing that they do, which is very important, is they have short films which are loaded onto a smartphone and handed out to these volunteers. And they narrowcast, as we call them, these films. What we mean by narrowcast is talk to a few people in small groups to try and raise awareness about the antecedents for mental health problems. So these are all the tasks that they do as volunteers. They spend 1 or 2 hours on an average in a day working on this. And over time, the Atmiyata volunteers get to be known as people who you could go to if you had any kind of a mental health issue. During the COVID crisis, this was particularly useful. When we had the lockdown, what it meant was every village had at least a mental health first responder who could provide immediate help and support to people in that villages. For the last 5 or 6 years now, we have developed this service in around 500 villages in the district.
I think some disruption. But thank you, Dr. Soumitra. We all understand that it's a science, it's a art, it's a subject, which needs a lot of attention. Raj, I'll bring you. Raj is the director, Mariwala Health Initiative, a grant making and advocacy organization working on accessible, affirmative, right-based, and user-centric mental health care. Raj also serves on the advisory board of the Global Mental Health Action Network, a global joint advocacy and communication coalition on mental health. And Raj, with you here, for sure, why this issue is so important right now. It has been very important, but this particular pandemic has certainly now we need more attention for sure. And why it is important to bring more resources to the institutions who are taking care of this very crucial, very hidden kind of subject. Over to you, Raj.
Thanks so much. Thank you for that introduction, and I'm so very glad to be here, especially honored to be talking alongside such esteemed and experienced co-panelists. When I first saw the title of this session, Next Philanthropy, the title running in my head was like, it's 2021 and we are still talking about these issues in an introductory way. So my first thing before I even start to talk about mental health is that we as Indian philanthropists and donors need to step up and do better. So let's apply the same principles of accountability, transparency, and impact to our own work before asking our partners for the same. So in this vein today, I'll speak briefly about why you can't afford to ignore mental health related funding. Before I start, I may say things that could be disturbing or upsetting, and so in case you would like to reach out, the iCall helpline offers free professional psychological support in 9 languages. The number is 915-298-7821, or you can email iCall at icall@tiss.edu, and what I'll do is I will put that in the chat box. Okay. Of course, to talk, because I'm not a psychiatrist, I'll be drawing on my experience with MHI. And currently, we work on 26 projects with 23 partners across the country in rural areas, urban informal settlements, hilly regions, and regions facing conflict like Manipur and Kashmir. Some of the communities that we work with are farmers, victims of violence, queer trans communities, Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi communities, youth, people incarcerated in mental health institutions, the homeless, and religious minority communities. So to start off, I'm actually not going to drop any figures on mental health. I'm not going to talk about the numbers of the people who live with mental health illness or concerns. I'm not going to talk about the lack of psychiatrists. I'm not going to talk about how many people live with depression or anxiety. Why? Because there's a problem with this approach. It's biomedical. There's a focus on conditions or a particular mental illness. Now, these are described as having a set of symptoms, much like a physical illness. So then the next step is, of course, treatment, which could be pharmaceutical, it could be some sort of allopathic, or at the most, there's some talk therapy. And at the end, then we are expecting to see some success in the form of reduction of symptoms. Now, this very approach is problematic if we're going to look at funding mental health. Why? Because it centers what we call the treatment gap. Now, the treatment gap is the difference that exists between the number of people who need mental health support and those who get support. It's a very Western-centric concept, and it's very often stated as the number of psychiatrists available per 1 lakh people in a country. So the moment mental health is mentioned in India, the lack of psychiatrists who are medical experts, who require years of training, that's brought up. Now, if I contrast this with a few other countries, the US, which is 4% of the world's population, has as many psychiatrists as the rest of the world put together. Okay, and they still have a huge treatment gap in mental health of about 25%. The UK, which is 4% of India's population, has as many psychiatrists as India put together. And the UK itself has a treatment gap of 25%. India's treatment gap is about 80%. So clearly, this is not the only thing we need to look at when we talk about mental health. So when we're talking about mental health, funders need to look beyond psychiatrists, need to look beyond words such as depression and anxiety. Also because the moment I say the small number of psychiatrists in India, funders think that this is an insurmountable problem, it's too expensive, and of course one of the favorite words of funders, no impact. So it's a very limiting narrative. And of course, I know why this narrative is used. It just underlines the urgency. The statistics sound very bleak, but more importantly, they're absolutely insufficient to understand mental health, especially around issues of access and the provision of better mental health. This approach actually ignores one of the key things within mental health, which is structure and systems. So let's talk about which factors affect awareness, provision, efficacy, and access to mental health services. Now, for example, people in India who live with mental illness and who require mental health care either do not have accessible services, or those who do manage to receive services do not get quality care that is affordable, easily available, and acceptable. Now, Soumitra spoke a little while earlier about the Atmiyata program, which is funded by MHI. And he's talking about a program in a village. Now, if I do a similar thing, if I do a similar biomedical thing as to physical health, I'm asking a psychiatrist to go and set up a camp in a village. How many villagers do you think are going to go over there and meet that possibly male psychiatrist from an urban location who may not speak in their native dialect? Very few. Even if I move out from a rural setting, what about those who don't live in the major metros? Is there anything there at all? The problem is that there is no presence of mental health at a primary and a secondary level. So for someone from a town to go to a tertiary or a large hospital, that can be intimidating, right? Especially if you have to travel for half a day, you're going to travel a long distance, you're going to pay for the travel, then you're going to pay for the healthcare, then you're going to pay for the medicine. Now, if I have to just take one condition, if I say I live with depression and I'm from a town, the travel and medicine alone in a month is going to cost me 2,000 to 3,000 rupees. And I'm not even counting the possibility of taking a day off from home and work and going into a big hospital to see a psychiatrist. And this is why the biomedical narrative is limiting. Access is a complex issue, and mental health funding needs to solve for that first. Unfortunately, the biomedical narrative also invisibilizes a key issue in mental health, which is the invisibility of mental health as a global challenge and as a development issue. And now, unfortunately, COVID has already shown us how mental health is impacted by and impacts a variety of social, economic, and political factors. So, mental health is a development challenge and cannot be seen in isolation of people's lives and contexts. And I'll give you two examples. First, social causation or the financial strain. The increased exposure to violence and food insecurity linked to poverty, combined with reduced access to social safety nets, such as food banks, income support, all increase the likelihood of people developing mental health problems. And everyone has seen this in COVID. Everyone, as I think Anshu was referencing, migrant workers. Now, that increases the likelihood of mental health issues. Conversely, most people with mental health issues also face barriers in availing proper education, finding jobs, and in exerting their civil and political rights. Tomorrow's Independence Day, we should know that many persons who live with mental illness are still unable to access their right to vote. So, again, if we move away from the biomedical narrative, we realize that we need a paradigm shift and we need to look at this in an intersectional manner, which takes on all the ways in which systemic and structural barriers all contribute to an individual's mental health. So my first kind of pointer is poor mental health is both a cause and a consequence of poverty, compromised education, gender inequality, physical ill health, violence, and other such global challenges. In fact, mental health has remained invisible or actually, I would say actually completely invisible in development paradigms. It influences 10 of 17 of the SDGs, no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality and reduced inequality. I'll give you two examples. Maternal depression has been shown to increase the risk of poor infant nutrition, stunting, and diarrheal disease. So, if you want to influence better health outcomes for infants, you must ensure that pregnant persons are routinely given mental health support and routinely screened for mental health conditions. Similarly, if I look at another category, depression has been shown to adversely affect adherence to antiretroviral medication amongst those living with HIV/AIDS. Again, to influence better health outcomes, mental health care and treatment should be integrated within HIV/AIDS programs. So that means that we are considering the social context, we are looking at the intersectionality of mental health, because if no matter which area you're funding, you cannot afford to ignore the mental health component. What do I mean when I say mental health? It means that we take into account that mental health is psychosocial. What does psychosocial mean? The social context influence and interacts with psychological, that is emotion, thought, feelings, reactions. So psychosocial interventions lead to better mental health outcomes, but they also lead to better outcomes in housing, in education, in legal support, in skill building. And if you're looking at mental health, you must understand that it's not enough to provide mental health services. Could we have provided talk therapy to migrant workers walking back home? Sure. Would that have really worked? No, it would be unethical to do so without linking to services that support livelihoods, shelter, and social inclusion. So the mental health problem is a problem of a care gap. It's squarely a development issue, an issue of inclusion, and it's a critical path to addressing inequality. And so it's very imperative to invest in, especially for LMICs. So funders cannot ignore mental health in India at all. And finally, I'm going to end by saying, as a funder, if you look at rights-based work, it's very critical to foreground community voices and participation by acknowledging how systemic barriers and marginalization specific to their particular context affect an individual's well-being. I know many funders mostly say no to fund mental health because they're worried about scalability, and ultimately they cite that as a reason for not funding. But I'm going to say that I'm going to ask you to consider, is scale possible without inclusion? Psychosocial intersectional work is at the crux of inclusion. So don't fall into this trap. Don't fall into the awareness trap. It's unethical to fund for mental health awareness if there's no one to talk to at the end of that awareness building. So to end, I'm going to say that as Indian funders, you have a responsibility. We all have a responsibility to fund, not to start our own programs, because you must keep communities at the center of mental health programs. And the only path to a holistic, universally accessible mental health ecosystem is through challenging structural inequality, countering systems of expert knowledge, such as psychiatrists, privilege and power from the margins, because mental health is a development issue and it's a social justice issue.
Thank you, Raj, and we will come back to you because there are questions in the Q&A. And one thing which I am also leaving for the money giver community and people who are working on the mental health, I am certainly worried about millions of people who are working in this particular sector, which is called the social development sector, and the kind of causes we all are working. Unfortunately, as I always say, that we are in the business of finding more and more grief. Right? We don't in all our work. Even today, all 4 or 5 of us, whatever we are doing, and the listeners of this particular seminar or webinar, most of us are in that business of finding more and more people who are not happy, fine, and we are trying to solve their problem. And I have seen this impact on my team for sure, and many other institutions. Because, if you are not affected by a disaster and you are going to a disaster hit area, that's a different issue. But you yourself are affected. You already have lost your family members or nearby, or you were not able to arrange for oxygen or whatever. And then you are trying to support someone with oxygen. right? These are, most of us are going through very complicated phase, and there is no end to it. We still have to work on, even if we solve one problem of the society, we are working on more and more problem. So I think the money giving community and the mental health professionals have a much larger work for this particular segment also, of thousands of caregivers, whether they are in the medical fraternity or they are in the social sector people, whether we are called, frontline worker or not, it doesn't matter, but we all are, and we all are going through this tough phase. Thank you so much. Fourth segment of this, Charcha is an interesting one again, and I feel that again the Northeast is at the end only, at the end of the day. We are talking about Northeast, and I always feel, and many of us feel, that it never gets its, due attention. It's far off. We don't understand that this is basically millions of people and many states together. I mean, this is one area where you have the maximum number of states, if you see the number of states that way. So we will talk about what is the monetary situation, what is the funding scenario in the area there. We know through our work also that there is, a large number of people with, because the distance is so much, because access is a bit complicated, because it is already ignored, because also a large part of it is the victim of the frequent disasters. The way some floods are not even considered floods. We don't even talk about it, although it affects millions of people every year. So whether this area is getting enough attention, enough monetary resources or not, and what else do we have to do for that? But before I call Dr. Syed Kazi, there's a video from Seven Sisters Development Alliance, or SESTA, and I'm just giving you a little bit warning that this video will have a lot of noise, because somehow the people have done it, and we are thankful to them that they are still able to send it to us. So just bear with that noise, and after that I'll introduce Dr. Kazi and bring him here to talk about the Northeast and the philanthropy part. Kato.
I'm indeed happy to say a few words on the philanthropic work SESTA has been engaged in during the COVID-19 pandemic. These works are mainly confined within 60,000 families in 745 villages spread across 16 districts and 32 blocks in 3 states in Northeast India, that is Assam, Meghalaya, and Tripura. SESTA's main focus is on livelihood promotion, sustainability, and income enhancement. SESTA's frontline workers are mainly involved in providing help and security to these villagers at the time of their distress. SESTA, at the time of first wave of COVID itself, has come out with the concept of nutrition gardening. As many as 40,000 families are covered under the scheme for sustainable livelihood support. Entrepreneurship training programs are also being organized, mainly for migrant workers returning home at the time of lockdown period. The purpose of this program has been to provide avenues for alternative skills development and livelihood support. Some other work SESTA engaged itself are SRI paddy cultivation, livestock rearing, and also providing help and support to the areas of rights and entitlements of women farmers. SESTA has also arranged to support these rural communities by other means, like distribution of ration kits as well as medical kits, arrangement of awareness program for COVID-19 vaccination, livelihood restoration through distribution of vegetable seeds, then provisions for both online and offline training program. Thus, SESTA's workers based in remote areas are able to meaningfully engage themselves with the rural communities to help them to achieve the desired goal of sustainability and livelihood security. I feel SESTA's continuous strive to bring in an inclusive society is indeed praiseworthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Goswami. So let me bring Dr. Syed Qazi, important subject for the Seven Sisters and this entire big area of the population, which often people feel that is ignored and it needs more attention from the development sector and all the components of development sector. Dr. Qazi has experience of working in the development sector since 2002. He was associated with the Center for Agriculture and Rural Development, One World South Asia and Digital Empowerment Foundation. He has also founded the Northeast Development Foundation, a not-for-profit society working for sustainable development in Northeast India. And Dr. Qazi also founded E-Northeast Award, a regional platform for digital innovation and practices in Northeast India. Just a little bit of biodata, whatever I'm able to pick up from the full pager biodatas of all. Over to you, and then after you, we all will come for a discussion and the Charcha as it is called. आप ऑडिबल नहीं है डॉक्टर गांधी? नहीं नहीं अभी भी नहीं. नहीं अभी नहीं. गौतम can
Hello, sir. Could you please connect your earphones, and there is a more options on your screen. You can just check the audio and video settings there. Or if you can unplug your earphones, I think we should be able to hear you. Please try to speak, sir. Dr. Qazi, could I request you to reload your browser, sir?
Let's wait for a couple of minutes. I'm sure it'll be okay.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes, you are, Dr. Qazi. Please go on.
So I think this incident of connectivity is, I think, needs to be looked into more desperately for the region. We are still struggling with low bandwidth, low spectrum allocation, and so on and so forth. But who will come first to invest? That is the main question. I think far-flung areas, typical geography, terrains, and all those challenges. So first of all, thank you, Anshu. I'm glad to see you because we hear from Northeast, hear a lot of stories about you and other people. Of course, Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy has been doing a lot of programs recently, also during COVID. So I think, so first of all, thank you for inviting me, and because of course there are many organizations in Northeast who are certainly doing good work, like SESTA, that the video that we saw. and there are many who are trying to do best as possible with limited resources and whatnot. Number one. Secondly, happy Independence Day in advance to everyone. And so tomorrow we celebrate the 5th year of independence. And so I think we have come a long way. Of course, we are still struggling with so many things of proper so-called, accurate national integration. There are a lot of conflicts, frictions here and there, border disputes that recently that you heard from Northeast. So as I think Anshul has also mentioned, जो page 3 में जो उत्तर पूर्व वाली जो बाढ़ वाले सीन है, तो ज़्यादा अच्छे खबरें जो होते हैं, अच्छे न्यूज़ शायद वहां तक पहुंचने में अभी भी दिक्कत है. Of course, the social media and all has helped a lot with the alternative media platforms, but still we are grappling with all this other challenges, certainly, which also impacts the time, energy, resources of leadership and all, because attention कहाँ जा रही है, focus कहाँ हो रहा है, कहाँ जाना चाहिए, the time and the energy and the investment. So those prioritization also gets affected in that process. So thank you, Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy, for inviting me for this Charcha 2021, and especially Ingrid that she wrote to me and inviting me. Thank you so much, first of all. And so, as one of the speakers has mentioned, that the topic itself, certainly we are looking at, we are discussing in a scenario where we have been exposed to so many situations, unseen, unheard, or unimaginable situations. So we were not prepared. Because we were into a different paradigm of development, CSR investment, philanthropy, and so on and so forth for a long time. But suddenly, I think the COVID has, it's kind of a, upside down kind of a thing where so many things have been exposed, whether you call the institutional structures, the systems of access or delivery, because we hear a lot of investment, crores or thousands of crores have been invested in every year annual budget and all. We hear a lot of stories, a lot of news, a lot of data, a lot of things. But COVID certainly has also talked about where this investment is going actually, how this investment has really impacted both public investment, government investment in the name of social security, health, education, and so on and so forth. And as well as probably the question is also about the private investments, through CSRs or philanthropy and things like that. Because probably the question could also be how sustainable has been this investment, how impactful has been this investment in order to make community resilient, actually resilient in terms of facing any such kind of situations, as you mentioned, Anshu, that about the annual floods and also the landslides, and also so many things. There are so many problems across the country, and also Northeast Pacific has problems on its own. So probably one thought is this in terms of probably COVID has also probably forced us to think about the kind of investment that we are making, whether it has been sufficient or effective, not effective, in fact, impactful, not impactful. Measuring the impact also probably it has exposed for all of us, both for research, advocacy, or for as well as for implementation also. So that we look at new way of, as you mentioned also, नई तरह से हम कैसे किस नई तरह से हम चीजों को देखें, समझे और चीजों को बैक रूम में जाके फिर से हम वार्तालाप करें, चर्चा करें, and we come with a new strategy and approach. So everyone has to be open to that thought process of going beyond the traditional mode or set norms of understanding and perception, that this is going to work and not going to work. I think that is another point. And our next point is certainly about that, because the four themes that you mentioned that initially also ek to hai gender, the marginalized communities that Paul has mentioned very minutely, and then of course the gender aspect that Sri Lataji has so nicely. I enjoyed her also the way she dissected those interpretations, and thirdly, of course, about the mental health too. Which is certainly, as the speaker, of course, my apologies, the name I couldn't collect. Uh,
Raj.
Raj, yes. Raj has mentioned that, because when investment happens, social investment, the impact देखते हैं या ये कितना हम कर पाएंगे नहीं कर पाएंगे. Those kind of thought process probably has to change if you really want to make our society really inclusive, sustainable, and so on and so forth. And lastly, the topic that you mentioned about Northeast, I see that the moment you just narrated the themes, I see that Northeast is and should be also considered as an area of subject of investment, irrespective of all the mental health, gender, education, health, everything falls within the larger social investment, no doubt. But why also we need to talk about Northeast as a specific area of investment, as probably that is another thought that strongly we carry now, and also we are trying to advocate in this part of the country. So Gautam, I have a small slide, a few slides. So do I share now from my machine? Am I allowed to share? So I'm trying to go
Yes,
back to
please
my.
go ahead.
Yeah. Dr. Kazi, थोड़ा जल्दी करेंगे so that we at least have half an hour for discussions also. Yeah, if you can wind up a little bit fast. Your slides.
Is it coming? Yeah.
We aren't able to see the slides, sir, so far. Have you clicked?
It is.
Yeah, we can see it now, sir.
Okay, thank you. So since I'm sitting in this of, so allow that kind of gaps in internet networking, and so with some slow, some disruption will also happen in my this thing. I just thought of putting this subject across to all of you. I may be correct, I may be wrong, I may be whatever, but this is a strong conviction that we carry, that I'm just trying to share something with all of us and all. How do we unlock? Because the whole philanthropy or CSR thing in the Northeast India, Northeast part of India. And then, of course, how do I change? Okay, sorry. Can you see, is it visible, or should I enlarge the screen? Is it okay?
Yes, fine.
Okay. Okay, so as in rest of the world, as rest of the country, of course, COVID has also affected Northeast India. Though there may not be so many studies or mainstream media focus or highlights, there are of course stories of migrants into reverse migration, and then also statistics that I have of 30 to 60% of workforce in the primary sector, which is largely informal and unorganized sector. They are affected because this sector has got closed down, primarily in the because they work in the primary sector. And also statistics of how unemployment rate has gone up to high as 41% in state like Tripura during COVID and all, 41%. And then also there are various news that have also come out about the health system could not respond the way that it could have responded. And also and so on and so forth. So and in fact, it's and maybe the COVID story for Northeast is also more of an invisible Northeast. How the stories could have evolved, could not have evolved, could have evolved, and also the one of the key players to also share the stories and make you hear and listen in other parts of the country through the civil society organizations in the Northeast. They also got badly affected because they were crumbling, they were just firefighting what to do, what not to do, because they are also messengers of information, promotion, telling you the story and whatnot. And also ऊपर से जो भी दो चीजें जो हुआ है, CSR amend किया गया है, FCR amendment and all. So that was another kind of nail on the coffin kind of a thing, where suddenly overnight and all, because ऊपर से पैसा resources नॉर्थ ईस्ट में सिविल सोसाइटी में वैसे ही कम आता है और काम तो कर ही रहे हैं, बट ऊपर से अचानक सडनली ऐसा अगर आता है, then certainly you can feel how organizations were trying to just juggle around, and suddenly some kind of a organizational disruptions, so-called disruptions happening. जिसके लिए of course few organizations like UNDP, DASRA and few NGOs also we came together, like SESTA and all, we came together in Northeast, and now also we are just discussing something with Edelgive also, how this civil society organization, at least the mid and small, of course there will be not many mid and small size, could be organizationally strengthened also. So that is one part. Secondly, COVID का story नहीं आना और documentation नहीं होने का मतलब ये भी है कि how many universities or colleges have also come forward in terms of documenting the stories in the northeastern states, which is also a part of learning, could have been part of learning, knowledge sharing, or advocacy within government and all. So those are kind of limitations, because वो idea आना मन में, idea आना दिमाग में आना, कुछ तुरंत innovate करना और strategy change करना, because this thing doesn't come overnight, because these things take a lot of time of, that in the process of working that way, सुबह शाम उसी में काम करना, सोचना, उसी situation माहौल में रहना, which other NGOs or other organizations or institutes in other parts of country, they are very prompt in response in terms of those, responding also to those first layer of promotion, batana, stories, studies, and so documenting and things like that. So those things doesn't happen as much as should have been or could have been. Though we did a study on the civil society response during COVID in Northeast, and that is one thing. And so those are just initial thoughts of how COVID has affected, and also the vulnerable communities like the Tea tribe community in Assam, which is the 20% of population of Tea tribe in Assam. They just got suddenly affected because tea production may affect hona, buying and selling affect hona, market got affected. And also 20% of population means they produce 53% of total India's production. If you all know that, and global India is the second largest world in the world, but still India may 53% is produced by Assam, this 20% population, especially the women workforce. तो उनका सडनली ये सब सारे कोलैप्स होना, सिस्टम एंड पेमेंट रेगुलरली नहीं आना, फिर और ऊपर से वेज इतना 170 रुपया वेजेस एंड और कोई जी सकता आज के तारीख में, एंड दैट आल्सो बिकम अ पॉलिटिकल इशू इन पॉलिटिकल इलेक्शन टाइम में. सरकार ने कहा कि हम 50 रुपये बढ़ा देते हैं, इलेक्शन के 10 दिन पहले बताया हम बढ़ा देते हैं, और इलेक्शन के बाद उसको ही कैंसिल कर दिया, हाई कोर्ट ने स्टॉप करा दिया, बिकॉज दिस इंडस्ट्री लॉबी टी लॉबी गॉन टू द कोर्ट एंड से ऑल दिस. सो यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड ऑल दिस थिंग्स, हाउ कोविड हैज अफेक्टेड. द स्टोरीज आर इक्वली वेरी ग्लूमी एंड वेरी sad and very anxiety वगैरह, but probably वो बाहर आना, लोगों का nature of talking because और the means and mediums बाहर आना, और ऊपर से बहुत सारी चीजें मैटर करता है. ऐसा नहीं है बिकॉज ऐसा आवाज सुन, अब न्यूज नहीं आ रहा है, कुछ नहीं हो रहा है, ऐसा नहीं कि नहीं हो रहा है. Problems equally exist, unemployment, poverty. And by the way, and if you can see my slide, you can see, of course, 50 million people are 4% of total population of India's total population, and 9% of total land area. Then you can see landlocked है, ये सब हम जानते हैं. But most important thing is lack of industrialization, where we also talk about philanthropy or CSR, why they will invest, who will invest, उनका impact क्या रहेगा. As you say, Srilata ji, that आपका centuries age problem you want to solve in 15 months, the indicated data. That is why sometimes I feel so disheartened, also so frustrated sometimes, because we need to work. But you put us in the time zone and data zone and all, but how do you create those impacts? And then of course the ecological and the environmental concerns or the resource richness of the region also you need to keep in mind, being the 6th ecological hotspot of the world, Northeast. And by the way, अभी जिस तरह से जो भी urbanization, so-called urbanization हो रहा है without any foresight, insight and all, I don't know how the region will respond to that. Frequently, earthquakes, as you have heard, I think frequently there have been earthquakes recently in recent months and weeks. So these are all indications of how our development ecosystem in the Northeast could be seen, not from sitting in Delhi कि हमने ऐसा बना दिया ऐसा ही होगा now, but probably this ecological thing, the culture of the people, the tribe of the people, उनका mindset, उनका needs, उनका history, region, how we customize those things and also look at the whole philanthropy and CSR investment in Northeast could also be seen into taken into consideration, not just that हमने ये scheme बना दी, ये नाम लगा दिया, branding सब जगह में लाके आप लगा दो implement करना है. So I think that is another way of looking at it. Then the strategical part, because it's Northeast is bounded by 5 countries: China, Sri Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Bhutan, and Nepal, and things like that. And also you have the Southeast Asian countries on the other side of the Northeast. So if you are saying कि Northeast strategically important है, ये बहुत sensitive zone में है, bordering with such critical neighbors के साथ है. So what is that level of investment also we are trying to put? Who is also as a national priority, as a national interest also, are we looking at that investment, CSR, philanthropic investment? Who is going to look into who is going to bring them, who is going to advocate them? If you really think the Northeast really needs to also come on board and become resilient, being all this in a strategic, very sensitive area, and ऊपर से years of insurgency, अभी भी insurgency का elements खत्म नहीं हो रहा, कुछ elements अभी भी है, कुछ news अभी भी है, unemployment इतना ज़्यादा है, रोजगार नहीं है, so all these things are equally.
Dr. Kazi, sorry to interrupt. मैं normally ऐसा करता नहीं हूँ, but because we just have about 20 minutes, and one thing which I feel very strongly, that in the next Charcha or many other forums and also CSIP, we certainly have to have different and very large conversations about Northeast as a very big geography itself. क्योंकि आपकी एक ही ये जो स्लाइड है वो ही बहुत कुछ कह रही है और मतलब ये हर हाल में अटेंशन मांगती है. All of us really need to pay more attention. So I think आप देखिए, we will have to conclude it so that we at least have 20 minutes to answer some of the questions.
Right. So I will take another 2 minutes. Is that
yeah, please.
And in this slide, अभी latest data है ये, in Northeast has got the highest people below the poverty line. It's 34.28%, almost 35% of poverty people below. Many of us doesn't know. We don't know. We don't know this. So this is where the story is. It's not coming out openly, glaringly, And also there are many aspirational districts. ज़्यादातर district aspirational तो Northeast में या Assam में ज़्यादा 13-14 districts है, aspirational districts है. And also as per the latest Niti Aayog data and statistics, the region is performing so bad in education, health, gender equality, zero hunger, and things like that. So this all the Niti Aayog reports in the last 2-3 years has been saying that to us. So quickly, this philanthropy, of course, there are distinctions between philanthropy, CSR, philanthropy, and CSR investment. I'm trying to distinguish that. There are hardly any philanthropic investment except for Tata Trust and APPI as the philanthropic initiative has done it. But Tata Trust has been trying its best as much as it could. It has been trying to invest in the region. And then the CSR philanthropy, not much. Of course, no data information, no documentation proper and all. And CSR investment, these are the data, only 3% of total CSR investment in Northeast, and vis-a-vis Northeast in entire India. And you can see states like Meghalaya, Nagaland, Mizoram, hardly they get CSR investment and things like that. Next is, so how do we do? Because अभी COVID, post-COVID में, of course, पहले से कहानी तो वही historical कहानी तो है ही, CSR philanthropic investment कितना कम है ज़्यादा है, we all know, we should be knowing. But also post-COVID, what we should do, what will be the focus strategy is, I feel, of course, first could be CSR advocacy persuasion. Whether do we make it mandatory also, that some percentage has to spend in Northeast, because that is where the national interest is involved in that also. How do we help? Because there's no industrialization. And also we must know that in 1996, Supreme Court has banned all forest activities in the Northeast because it has to maintain the green cover of the country also. So how we are compensated for that also is a region. अगर नहीं कर सकते, region है, topography है, ecosystem को बचाना है, तो हम क्या करेंगे हम? What will be the activity then? Who will compensate and all those stuff? So those kind of things has to be taken into consideration. Then the CSR philanthropy, yes, and philanthropy, of course, there are of course local philanthropy also, but we need to just see how it can be mobilized and invested in the region. but probably policy का कोई intervention की ज़रूरत है. Maybe yes, we feel that is what we yes. Otherwise, nobody is willing to invest in the way we have been invested. Only 3% आप बताइए what we can do on that. Just another 2 slides, Anshu. So this is one. Table that is in front of you. You can see the investment level Northeast में यहाँ से आता है जो Assam, Meghalaya, Nagaland, and all this. So this kind of investment that we have, and next is these are the areas in Northeast में जो भी investment ज़्यादा focus करते हैं अक्सर for education, health, poverty, sustainable, gender, and all. You can see the percentage and all numbers. And as I told you, the Niti Aayog का जो statistics, even after 48% spend के education skills में, so why the Niti Aayog report is still saying that? Where is the synchronous happening? Where is synergy happening and all? Otherwise, why 48% तो अच्छा खासा हमको response मिलना चाहिए था हमको all. So where qualitative investment, focus investment, sustainable investment, implementation impact are equally important beyond investment also. What are the things that we have from implementation planning and design and things like that? Last slide. What is the last slide? Yes, this is the last slide. How do we enable accelerated philanthropy and CSR presence and investment in Northeast? Do we see it as a national priority area, development area, strategic region if we consider investment, spiritual investment? So certainly we need policy support in that case. If we really want to see the CSR investment, philanthropic investment coming in a big way in the region to help the region and the people. But that is also about whole, there are so many things, decisions are taken on so many considerations also, I understand. And do we also consider regional imbalance as a factor in CSR and philanthropic investment? Why should not we? Why should not we? That is my question. Is tribal area development, the most tribal population is also in the northeastern states. Why we cannot have a kind of a say, this should be another criteria of philanthropic and CSR investment. It could be area of research also. Then community mainstream investment program, as Paul has also mentioned, and probably in case of Northeast, mainstreaming could mean other thing. That is also under regional mainstreaming also. How do we invest in the people, the region, their needs, health infrastructure crumbling, unemployment high, education is crumbling, the poverty is very high as I mentioned. So what do we do that? So, and also another area to look into is critical infrastructure development program. I'm not only in those roads and highways, I'm talking about social infrastructure largely. Social infrastructure also we need to invest in health, education, livelihood, and so on and so forth. So with those thoughts, the final comment would be that yes, the philanthropy, next level of philanthropy beyond COVID, probably how do we convince, how do we advocate, how do we tell the funders and the givers and the platforms and so on and forth, and also please look into us also, invest in us, be with us, stay with us, give time with us and all. Otherwise, आके चले जाना, कुछ invest करके चले जाना, इतना symbolic दे के चले जाना, but in properly in-depth, inherent investment जो गहराई तक जाए, roots तक जाए, proper investment वगैरह, उस तरह की चीजें बहुत जरूरी है. Along with research and studies are equally important, and that is what also we are trying to do. And on 20th of August, we are also organizing a program and a policy brief discussion around bridging the CSR divide in Northeast. On 20th of August, we are doing that. So with those thoughts, I thank you, Anshu, and thank you everyone. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Kazi. I think it was very, very informative. Just that we really need time to understand, this is a very grave issue. So let us come back to a small, I think I would request all of us to get into a small dialogue, because we just have about 10 minutes with us before we sum it up. And it has been a very informative session. And it's good that within like 1 hour, 45 minutes, we are able to actually at least touch upon 4 very different kind of subjects, although very, very interrelated subject. So one question to all, and I think it's time to really have a very sharp and very small to the point answer if we can give, so that we can use this time very effectively. What are these barriers, which are affecting us in each of this issue, and whether the COVID crisis has been able to really bring some attention on this, or has been able to change certain lenses, क्योंकि जो अभी the conversation which was happening in the last 1 hour plus, I think most of us are saying that the lenses are still almost the same, and people are still not trying to understand the gravity of the issues. And maybe not many people are really aware that the issues have really grown much bigger that way. So from all of us, so if Paul can really talk about that marginalized communities, are these communities getting more attention, or it is just limited to the migrant workers and giving food to the migrant workers, and then when they settle down in their hutments, we ignore them. The moment they're out of sight, we start ignoring them. Or Raj can communicate that whether people are really understanding the development community that it is now a serious issue, and it needs more attention. Is something changing? Has COVID really done something good also to bring certain attentions? And when Lataji was talking, I was also thinking about the sex workers and transgenders that way. I mean, one of the things which we have been saying, that maybe sex workers and transgenders will be the last people to get back to their jobs in this entire scenario. Northeast, we just heard a lot about the issue. So over to you, Paul, Raj, and Lataji, to respond to this.
Yeah. Thank you, Anshu, for collecting this. I think one is the pandemic has only accentuated the existing inequalities and has shown us the gory face of several of these. And it has shown us in the face of marginalized migrant labor, who mostly Dalits and Adivasis, then the resilience, the courage they have showed, but also another factor which has showed is new levels of communities who have not been part of the marginalized have been forced into the marginalized. I think that is something which is very, very worrisome, because of economy and the kind of disruptions it has caused. I think greater number of people have come in who otherwise were somehow eking their living out, not that they're doing extremely well. And I think therefore the competition, the space for visibility, as well as the need for reaching out is much greater than what we're doing. That is something that we'll have to really work. So how do we work double the kind of a thing? I don't think we can allow pandemic to restrict us, but we need to be continuously be innovative to see how we can reach out in this very restrictive time. I think this is something that the pandemic is testing our own courage and levels to reach out to communities.
Lataji, you can add something, and then Raj.
Sure. I don't want to take much time because I think it's unfortunate that we couldn't hear from some of the participants as well. It would have been interesting. I just want to make one point, especially in the context of COVID, and as you said, not post-COVID, but in a COVID world. My concern and my worry is that even historically and traditionally, particularly our Indian philanthropies, they always tend to see women in the victim role. So it's always as a victim, as a survivor, rape survivor, rape victim, this kind of thing. And I think now, in a certain way, COVID has exacerbated that because we rightly had to draw attention to the very gendered impact of the pandemic. Yeah. I mean, Raj was talking about mental health. I mean, there has been a huge trauma faced by women, and this cutting across class and across caste, but has been very, very severe among impoverished and marginalized communities. So I think the problem is that it has aggravated and reinforced this victim imagery for philanthropy. And philanthropy loves to rescue. They like to be the rescuer, the one who rides in on a white horse and, throws its money in, and I saved all the, there's a certain kind of a savior very seductive savior framework that's operating there. It's very unconscious. It's very well disguised in some cases, not so well in others. So I think what I would like to see, and I hope all of us can help to bring to the forefront, where women are acting as managers of this crisis, where women are acting as agents in preparing communities. Because see, what women never do, having been a grassroots movement builder for 25 years of my life, I can guarantee one thing: they never work on an issue basis. You will never, that NGO specialize in, I'm a health NGO, I'm an education, I'm a mental health NGO, I'm a women's NGO. They don't work like that. A. B, they think of the whole community, though they don't just think of themselves. But if you put women-driven solutions at the center and approach women as primary agents of change, as managers of the impact of the crisis in communities, and invest in those kinds of processes, I think that would be a fantastic long-term. Because even in
Wonderful.
post-earthquake scenarios I've seen, when women have taken over the post-earthquake reconstruction, as happened in Maharashtra in after the
Latur.
Latur earthquake, then the whole thing starts transforming. So if you're
Yeah.
looking for a silver bullet, that is it. How do you invest in women as real managers of change processes and of managing impacts of crises like the pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you. Raj, your comment, and then Dr. Kazi. Yeah, Raj.
So I think in terms of, to answer maybe what COVID has done, I would hope that it has made some of the connections clearer. That a lot of this work, development work, social justice work, must tackle things at the very upstream, or must tackle structural oppression. And by that I mean, there have been many communities who have been affected by COVID, but the ones who are disproportionately affected are communities who are marginalized by gender, caste, class, ability, sexuality, religion. And it's not that they weren't affected before, they've always been in a crisis of care. This crisis of care has only been heightened simply because family, state, larger society abdicate their accountability and responsibility for those who do not conform to gender, sexuality, caste, class, religion, and ability. I think lots of change needs to be done, and maybe it's time for Indian philanthropy to really look at rights-based work that challenges cis, heteropatriarchal, Brahmanical structures. That's one. And I think the other thing is changes need to be made even here and now. The development field still talks about gender in a binary gender. We are still only talking, it would seem, about cis women rather than trans women, not transgenders, because that's not how we use the term. But yes, so that's, I'm done.
Yeah. Dr. Kazi, you have any comment? Then we'll just sum it up. Yeah. Any comment that, although you explained it very well, that I think what from your angle we can see that Northeast is still largely unattended that way, and the share. I mean, someone actually asked the question also, the equal distribution of the resources of the philanthropy money, but I'm sure, as all of us feel, that Northeast is certainly a little bit cut off. And then, of course, when Northeast is cut off, all the communities we are talking about, other three speakers, are in any case normally cut off that in that process itself. Any last comment from you?
So
and then
my last comment is that there's a general narrative in the region that we are alienated for so many things, distance, resources, opportunities, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of things already talked about and all. So and that alienation, and then you see the COVID thing also now. How in 2 years, how it has just upside down, put everything haywire in the region. And coming to the specific to the social sector, development sector in Northeast, although there has been a historical gap, development injustice or philanthropic investment injustice. I'm not saying just to blame anyone, just to say that focus or attention has not been there. But after COVID तो there's more the challenge, and ऊपर से आप वो जो FCR amendment है, आपका CSR amendment वगैरह है, तो उससे और affected हो गया है. So now certainly these civil society organizations are struggling, baffled, struggling, and a lot of anxiety, uncertainties. Because if you consider civil society organizations, frontal organizations to work with the community, hand in hand with the government and all, so where do they go now? From where do they go now? The issues are glaring, the problems are glaring, though it hasn't come out openly. And I put certain statistics to you. After COVID, also this has been more exposed by Niti Aayog report and so on and so forth. So where does, apart from government investment, do we need to look at CSR investment, philanthropic investment? They need to look at the region as a focus of investment. For the nation's sake, national integration's sake, national priorities' sake, strategic interests' sake, if that is also could be considered by the donors and givers and funders, it will be great. Because that is where the people needs to be mainstream also, emotionally, everything comes into the picture in the post. So don't leave the region, focus on the region. I think you need to also give attention.
Thank you so much. And it's a complicated job to sum up the 2-hour discussion in 3-4 minutes. But I am going back to a story of Kerala floods when we were working there, and suddenly we got 2 calls, one from one Tamil Nadu home and the other one was from Andhra home. These are caregiving home for kids or destitutes or whatever you say. And then we realized that actually they just wanted the basic food supplies, which some people have been giving for years. But the moment Kerala flood happened, that money was diverted to Kerala flood in the emergency, and the need of those 2 homes were not fulfilled. Okay, so what I am trying to say that many times the new money doesn't come, and the old money is diverted at the cost of certain causes which are extremely, extremely important for all of us. And today, to be honest, all the 4 things which we discussed, that covers millions and millions and millions of people. Almost every second, third house is covered if you see such kind of issues which are happening in India. So that's a huge community we have been talking about. So that's extremely important, for the philanthropy sector, for the development sector to really look into these issues. This is a change scenario that needs more attention. A lot of things will not give us immediate satisfaction or a good picture or a good report, but that will be a very long lasting work, and it will not be a patch up or a band-aid, but will be a root work, which I often say that it's about treating malaria versus killing mosquito. So many of these things, if we work, it is something like killing mosquitoes. We also need to, just to sum up my own comment, I would say that when I see this particular disaster of the last 18 months, I feel that it is something like large number of middle class people or the lower middle class people, where the one generation struggles for life, and then the second generation is able to do something. I feel that in many and hundreds and thousands of families with whom all of us are trying to work, they have really lost something which a generation had really struggled for. And it is too early to say for many people to say that now it is a generation loss. But in many cases, we can see that they do not have a piece of land which they can sell again to bring a kid to the school. All that is over. So now it's another generation which will be fighting together. Philanthropy lenses have changed a little bit, for sure. We have seen it in the last few years. But I think it needs much bigger changes. It needs to really look much deeper. And I would say that there are large number of so-called non-issues which we do not consider an issue because those are not highlighted by the situation or by the media, or those are not visible to us. So people walking are visible, but people settling down somewhere where there is nothing to settle is not visible. So how do we really bring the philanthropy lenses in the disruption mode to these invisible issues, to these non-issues? and to kill these mosquitoes and not only treating malaria. My sincere thanks to all four of you to spend 2 hours and all the people who had this session with lunch or after lunch. And a sincere thanks to CSIP, Nudge, and Charcha 2021. I think it was a beautiful experience. It was an enriching experience and a lot to learn. Thank you very much. All the best. Stay safe.
Thank you, Anshu, for
Thank you.
driving us. Thank you, all the panel members and all the participants, CSIP, and Gautam, Sakshi especially. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. See you soon. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Thank you. Nice to have met you all.
Stay safe. Stay safe from
Thank
third
you,
Delta
all of
and
you.
whatnot.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Take care.
Thank you.
everyone.